For hundreds of years following the barbarian invasions and the fall of the Roman Empire, images created by artists were influenced by the Byzantine East. Rigid icons created by anonymous artisans used time-honored formulas. Then, in the late 1300s, an entirely new way of looking at and representing the world gradually emerged. For the first time in centuries, we know the names of individual artists. Among the first was Giotto di Bondone, an artist who seems to have rediscovered nature itself. Saints and saviors were no longer remote abstractions, but warm, responsive individuals who could be seen every day in the streets of villages and towns. Giotto set the scene and pointed the way to a new way of looking at life and the world. The Renaissance had begun. Renaissance means rebirth, the rebirth of interest in the architecture and arts of classical Rome. All the arts, as well as literature and music, moved into a Renaissance frame of mind at different times. Advances in one area, inspiring changes in another. Although religious imagery retained the center stage, it was enriched by keen observation of the real world, especially in the bustling city-state of Florence. Florence was a republic founded on commerce and ruled by an organization of guilds, independent associations of bankers, artisans, and manufacturers. The Campanile, or bell tower, designed by Giotto for the Cathedral of Florence, was a source of great civic pride. Relief sculptures showed the influence of the various guilds and crafts. Just across from the Campanile is the 13th century baptistry. Here we see the first sure signs of the new concepts at work. Two great bronze doors on the south side, designed by Andrea Pisano in the 1330s, told the life story of John the Baptist. Pisano's reliefs still retain some of the stiffness of the Gothic style, but there are hints of his exposure to classical sculpture and a new age. In 1401, a competition for a pair of doors for the north side of the baptistry was announced. 20-year-old Lorenzo Ghiberti did the winning design. His doors were organized in 28 quadrifoil frames arranged in 7 rows of 4. The subjects were stories drawn from the New Testament. He showed a new freedom in handling the human figure, using the play of light and shadow to increase the dramatic impact. Ghiberti's figures seemed to emerge from the background to create a new sense of space. He would work on these doors for the next 21 years. Ghiberti was chosen to create a third and final set of doors for the eastern side of the baptistry. Ghiberti was in his late 40s when he created these reliefs between 1425 and 1452. The sense of space has greatly increased, and now you see a new element: the use of perspective drawing techniques in the architectural details. The concepts of perspective were developed by the architect Filippo Brunelleschi. It's interesting to note that Brunelleschi began as a sculptor, but gave it up for architecture after losing the competition for the baptistry doors to Ghiberti. While studying in Rome, Brunelleschi measured many monuments of ancient Roman architecture. From this moment, elements of classical Roman architecture would appear in all Renaissance architecture. Brunelleschi's first major achievement was to design and build the dome for Santa Maria del Fiore, the Cathedral of Florence. He used a series of semi-domes and buttresses to carry the weight of the dome. He constructed the large drum with the oval windows to raise up the dome. He actually built two domes, one shell inside and tied to the other. This strengthened and lightened the entire structure. When the marble lantern was finished at the summit, Brunelleschi's was the largest dome since the Roman Pantheon and the highest in the world. While the dome was going up, Brunelleschi designed the loggia for the Hospital of the Innocents, the first ever foundling home for orphans. Here, he brought together the classical elements of arch and column, and he would use these again and again. Here in San Lorenzo and in Santo Spirito, on the other side of Florence, Brunelleschi created a marvelous three-dimensional one-point perspective drawing. The elegant lightness of the walls is achieved by raising each arch on a block-like extension on top of each column. This, in turn, raises the center of the arch, making it appear taller and lighter. The same lightness can be seen in his design for the Pazzi Chapel, built after his death in 1446. The combination of white stucco with gray stone architectural elements became very popular after Brunelleschi first used it. Brunelleschi's buildings frequently incorporated ceramic sculptures by Luca della Robbia. Luca della Robbia based his sculptures on careful, objective observation. There can be no doubt that real children posed for these reliefs. They were part of this marble choir placed in the Duomo in the 1430s. This marble choir, carved by Donatello, was placed opposite it at the same time. His early works representing the patron saints of various guilds were placed in niches in the guild's church called or Saint Michel. They have an easy, relaxed naturalism, far removed from the rigid poses of Gothic saints. This sculpture of David was done in 1408 when the artist was 22. This bronze David, done about 40 years later, was one of the earliest known examples of a freestanding nude created since antiquity. Donatello's assistant, Bertoldo de Giovanni, would eventually pass the master's lessons on to his young pupil, Michelangelo. Donatello's influence can be seen in the bold, solid figures found in the paintings of Masaccio. Painted in the 1420s, when the artist was only 21, these are real people, alive in the real world of Florence, boasting its new architecture. Although Masaccio died at age 27, he had invented an entirely new way of painting. Little by little, it would be taken up by other artists. Each individual artist wrestled with the problems of representation, perspective, light, and shade, and came up with his own unique solutions. Fra Angelico painted a powerful illusion of space, but he still retained the old double-scale method of presenting people in one size and buildings in another smaller scale. Andrea del Castagno created a full-scale space filled with powerful portraits of saints and apostles in strong lights and darks. Del Castagno and Domenico Veneziano worked on this painting together. And in his mural painting, Veneziano was assisted by his pupil, the youthful Piero della Francesca. He placed his figures squarely in an accurately drawn architectural space of the same scale and size. In these frescoes, Piero della Francesca continued the massive forms first painted by Masaccio and added the delicate coloring of Fra Angelico to create his own sense of visual unity. The atmosphere of experimentation and the rapid exchange of ideas in the artistic community of Florence produced a highly individualistic output. Filippo Lippi presented a very fashionable Virgin Mary along with a view of a distant landscape. This elegant master passed on many of his ideas to his young pupil, Sandro Botticelli. Botticelli, like many of his contemporaries, painted a self-portrait into some of his works. Here, in the Adoration of the Magi, painted in the 1470s, the artist stands at the right edge of the panel. Botticelli was one of the key innovative experimenters in this age of exploration and discovery. His imagery, color, and design became his unique signature. His Primavera and Birth of Venus bring together a treasury of classical themes and mythology in a rarefied, idealized golden age. Andrea del Verrocchio, whose name means true eye, was a more typical Renaissance artist since he was both an accomplished painter and sculptor. His bronze sculpture of Doubting Thomas has great depth of feeling and humanism. It retains its sculptural mass, yet has the same crisp linear quality found in his paintings. Notice the similarities between the figure and composition in this painting of St. John the Baptist. Incidentally, a young apprentice, Leonardo da Vinci, probably painted the two angels in the lower left. Although Leonardo da Vinci developed his artistic skills and painted many acknowledged masterpieces, his interests spread far beyond painting and sculpture. He is, perhaps, the most Renaissance of Renaissance men, because his interest, curiosity, and accomplishments cover such a wide range of areas. His drawings tell the story as he examined everything from how muscles attach to bones to how buildings and machines work. Da Vinci was ahead of his times, with many successes and many failures. His painting of the Last Supper began to disintegrate as he painted it. Andrea Mantegna was the opposite of Leonardo. His fascination with perspective would continue throughout his career as a leading Renaissance painter outside of Florence. New architecture provided a sumptuous setting for many paintings by Venetian artists, such as this masterpiece, painted by Giovanni Bellini. Of course, many of the buildings appearing in paintings of the period were never built. Bartolomeo, the Florentine architect, did build real and powerful structures, like this trend-setting palace for the Medici. Palazzo Medici set the style for palace architecture for almost 100 years. The transition from the powerful, rusticated stone blocks of the first floor to the smooth surfaces of the third floor became a standard. Renaissance palaces faced inward to a large central courtyard. The lower story is a continuous arcade. The upper stories had mullioned windows, and the third floor was once an open loggia. It was here that 14-year-old Michelangelo Buonarroti had been invited by Lorenzo the Magnificent to live and study art. It was here he learned to sculpt. This relief sculpture was done when Michelangelo was 18 and offers a hint of what was yet to come. The 21-year-old Michelangelo already shows a clear command of the medium, as well as three-dimensional form when he carved this god of wine for a rich Roman patron. He was already 23 when he carved perhaps the most famous work, the Pietà, now in the Vatican. Masterful and tender with calm power, it's one of the few works he signed. In 75 years of work, His main interest was the life of the human soul as expressed by the human body. Paint and stone were only the vehicles for the thought. That is particularly true in the colossal figure of David, finished in 1504, the earliest monumental statue of the High Renaissance. Originally placed in front of the Palazzo dei Priori, the town hall, the image of David overcoming the giant Goliath became a symbol of the Florentine Republic. Inside the palazzo, Leonardo da Vinci had already begun a design for a monumental mural, the Battle of Anghiari, which didn't survive. Leonardo and Michelangelo, giants of the Cinquecento, the 1500s, were joined by a third master, Raffaello, the youngest of the three high Renaissance masters. In Florence, he painted over 17 Madonnas and Holy Families in 3 years. Raphael was called to Rome in 1509 by Pope Julius II to decorate a series of rooms with frescoes. This painting, called the School of Athens, sums up the new classical spirit of the High Renaissance. Here, in this great architectural setting, we find a dynamic perspective drawing peopled with heroic figures. Leonardo's portrait appears as the bearded philosopher Plato in the center. Bramante, the architect of St. Peter's, is painted as Euclid drawing a circle. A single, lonely, mysterious man sits in the foreground leaning on a marble block. This is Michelangelo, who was working nearby and had just finished the first phase of the Sistine ceiling. He'd been commissioned in 1508 to paint the Sistine ceiling. The enormous painting took him 5 years to complete. Its complex composition was a sweeping epic of stories from the Old Testament. Prophets and sibyls were seated on gigantic thrones. Nude youths sat in a painted architectural extravaganza that framed each scene. The scenes lead the viewer from the creation of the universe to the creation of Adam and on to the story of Noah. As Michelangelo progressed, he gained confidence, and his painted images became not just bolder, but larger and more simple. When Michelangelo returned to Florence, he designed the new sacristy of San Lorenzo to house the tombs of Lorenzo the Magnificent and his younger brother, Giuliani de' Medici. Conceived as an architectural and sculptural ensemble, it is the only work where Michelangelo's sculptures remained in the setting designed for them. He worked on and off on this project for 15 years, along with the design for the Medici Library, but even then, it was not completed. During all this time, Michelangelo was also working on sculptures for a monumental tomb for Pope Julius II, a project of fits and starts begun in 1513 and completed in 1545. The centerpiece of the final tomb was a masterpiece of Michelangelo's maturity, Moses. Between 1536 and 1541, he painted the central monument of the High Renaissance, the Last Judgment, in the Sistine Chapel. The mood had clearly changed. He accepted the commission to complete the building of St. Peter's Basilica without pay for the salvation of his soul. His designs for the exterior, as well as the massive dome, set a new standard. In his 1537 designs for the buildings and pavement of the Campidoglio, the civic center of Rome, he created a dramatic urban environment. Although the buildings weren't finished until after Michelangelo's death in 1564, you can see many new elements that would lead a younger generation towards the age of the Baroque. This Pietà, for his own tomb, captures the pensive mood of Michelangelo's final years. The Renaissance ideal of innovation and creative curiosity could not be contained. It spread out from Florence to Rome and finally to the rest of the world. The Renaissance marked the emergence of the individual as an intellectual and creative force at the center of society. In spite of its religious imagery and settings, Renaissance artists, painters, sculptors, and architects prepared the ground and pointed the way towards the emergence of a modern, secular age.